This is definitely the most mind-bending drama of 2024, and it is also the work that has consumed the most of my brainpower and time. I risk going bald to bring you this analysis. If the mind-bending level of life's side quests is 1 star, then this drama's level is 100 stars. To make it easier for everyone to understand, I have divided it into Universe A and Universe B, along with a pre-existing space. The domain line space is the connection point between the 2 universes. The story begins with Jo, an astronaut in Universe B, who is driving with her daughter Alice as they embark on their escape. A police car is quickly chasing them from behind, and Jo looks fearfully at the cold atom equipment in the car as the police car drives over the bridge. After catching their breath, they arrived at a secluded house. After Jo settled her daughter Alice, she hurried to hide the cold atom equipment, but then she heard Alice's cries for help coming from a distance. But Alice is clearly inside the house. Jo quickly goes back to check on her daughter, and finds that Alice is sleeping. Then she goes outside to look for the source of the sound. The scene shifts back 5 weeks, where in Universe A, Jo's husband Mag is alone with their daughter at the International Space Station, which includes NASA and the Russian Space Agency. Alice's mother works here. Jo video calls her daughter and discovers that a colleague, Paul, is conducting an experiment. He is attempting to capture particle superposition at extremely low temperatures. If the atomic experiment is successful, it could reveal different outcomes of an event, and even show parallel universes. Under the direction of the Rocket Propulsion Laboratory's research director, Henry, Paul initiates the cold atom experiment, unaware that it has succeeded. In an instant, the universe, the laboratory of the space station connected by the universe walls, has turned into a pre-line space. At that moment, an unidentified object crashes into the spaceship. The hull was ruptured, and the space station was subjected to a strong impact, causing tremors. Paul in the laboratory was pierced through the arm by a metal beam, and the bridge was also affected due to the cold atom experiment. NASA lost communication with the space station, interrupting the call between Alice and her mother. Jo's consciousness seemed to be pulled away by an unknown force. After the space station regained calm, NASA re-established contact and guided the astronauts to extinguish the fire and escape danger. However, Paul's arm was trapped under the frame, leaving him severely injured and possibly facing amputation, while the space station also faced serious oxygen deprivation and pressure issues. The agency ordered the bridge to repair the truss structure of the space station's life support system, or Union 1 would lose power and oxygen supply. The space agency took over the guidance work, and Jo proceeded to the damaged location of the truss structure as instructed. He was shocked to find that the damage was very severe. The bridge moved to the location of the impact, where there was a 50-centimeter hole. Just as he was inspecting the impact site, a dead astronaut's body suddenly flew out from inside. How could a dead astronaut's body appear out of nowhere and collide with the space station, sending the bridge into space? Fortunately, his colleagues arrived just in time to rescue the bridge. The space agency did not believe that a dead astronaut's body had collided with the space station. Paul unfortunately passed away due to excessive blood loss, leaving 4 crew members remaining. The space agency instructed the crew to use the Union 2 escape pod to return, but the lifeboat could only accommodate 3 people, necessitating that one person stay behind to replace the battery and repair the power system of Union 1 before returning to Earth. As everyone sat in silence, not wanting to be the one to stay, Jo selflessly volunteered to remain behind. After bidding farewell, the 3 astronauts began their journey back, while Jo stayed alone on the Union 1 space station. Now, Jo has only 19 hours of oxygen left. Will he be able to replace the battery and return to Earth in time? Jo arrived at the designated location and began to dismantle the battery. In Universe B, Henry, the director of rocket propulsion at NASA, requests the Russian Space Agency to allow Jo to bring back the cold atom experiment, which has the potential to change the world. However, if Jo takes more time to bring back the experimental equipment, she will face life-threatening dangers. After repeated requests from Henry, the Space Agency compromised, giving Jo an additional mission to transport cold atom equipment. Meanwhile, the 3 crew members in the escape pod are facing the peril of landing. After deploying the parachute, the 3 crew members successfully land back in Universe A. In Universe A, after the Space Agency informs Jo's husband about the situation, Mag takes their daughter Alice to the Space Agency to visit family, but the control center is in communication with space. To interrupt, the family is unable to make a video call. Alice is overly worried that her mother has run off in anger, and by the time Mag discovers this, Alice has already run far away. Mag quickly chases after her. In the space station, after Jo loses contact with the ground, she hurriedly takes the disassembled battery to Union 2, with 15 hours remaining. Jo rushes to install the battery, but hears knocking sounds from outside. Following the sounds, she investigates and discovers the cold atom device, unaware that she has entered the threshold space between the 2 universes. Suddenly, the scene before her changes, and the space station transforms into a hallway. She hears knocking sounds coming from a wardrobe ahead, and approaches it. At first glance, he found himself back at the space station. The next moment, the scene shifted to 5 weeks later, where a bridge between universes appeared in a snowy landscape. He followed the sound of his daughter Alice's cries for help, and arrived at his former cabin, unaware that he had reached the threshold space of Universe B. The snowflakes drifting down from the sky fell as if time had momentarily stopped, only to resume their descent. As the snow continued to fall, he opened the door and discovered he had arrived at a cabin he rarely inhabited. He saw a cat that had already passed away, indicating that he had witnessed the dead Schrodinger's cat. Joe followed the sound upstairs to investigate, only to find that the noise was coming from the wardrobe. When he opened it, he was stunned by what he saw. Her own daughter, and this Alice is actually from Universe A, meaning she is Joe's biological daughter. What is going on here? Let's analyze the reasons. In the cold atom experiment, which is a microscopic experiment similar to Schrodinger's cat, every time the box is opened, the cat exists in a superposition of life and death. After opening the box and observing the object, the act of observation interferes with the cat's state, causing it to collapse into one outcome of either being alive or dead. In the drama, the setting is that the cold atom experiment triggers a threshold space, allowing different outcomes to be observed. If opening Schrodinger's box reveals a world where the cat is dead, then after activating the cold atom experiment, one can see a world where the cat is alive. Or conversely, one might see another outcome. After the cold atom experiment was activated, NASA and the space agency became the observers. Joe and Paul became the subjects of observation for the outside world, and the cold atom experiment laboratory turned into a superposition platform due to the interaction with cold atoms. This phenomenon would disappear once the observers appeared. As a result, Joe not only saw parallel universes, but also found himself in two worlds at the same time. Following the previous events, 5 weeks later at the Cosmic Wall, Joe rescued his biological daughter from Universe A, but he did not know how she ended up there. He took Alice to another house where they could stay, and started a fire to keep warm. Then, the adorable Alice said something unexpected. This sentence can prove that Joe is already dead, but Joe is confused. He quickly runs to draw warm water for his daughter. The next scene is even more bizarre. He finds his daughter lying on the bed in her pajamas, even though she was clearly in the bathtub just moments ago. Joe rushes over to check, and discovers that the daughter in the bathtub has vanished. Just as Joe is anxiously searching everywhere, his daughter in pajamas appears. Could it be that his daughter has teleported? We begin to analyze. After Joe crossed the cosmic wall, the daughter he saved is his biological mother from Universe A, while the daughter in front of him is actually the daughter of Chow from Universe B. The director silently uses flashbacks to depict what happened 5 weeks later. At the beginning of the story, it creates the impression that Alice has also traveled through time. On the contrary, as I just mentioned, it is the threshold space that results in Joe simultaneously being in two parallel worlds, leading to the existence of two daughters. As for why the cabin has become a superposition platform, it is due to the anomalous effects of the cold atom device nearby. The story continues with Joe looking at this daughter in confusion, noticing that her hair smells different from that of his earlier daughter, and asking where his earlier daughter has gone. Alice has no idea what her mother is talking about. In the next moment, the scene shifts to the space station 5 weeks later, where there is a communication failure. Joe calls NASA, but receives no response, unaware of his own disappearance. Within hours, the space agency determined that the bridge had lost all signs of life, and would not initiate a rescue operation. Therefore, Joe could only rely on himself to return to Earth. With 5 hours and 49 minutes remaining, he still had 4 batteries to replace, and he needed to change them faster. Suddenly, the white cloth on Paul's head fell off, so Joe had to go down to the escape pod to check if Paul was still breathing. After helping Paul close his eyes, he covered Paul's head with the white cloth, as he intended to bring Paul's body back to Earth. I'm afraid of the dark. In Universe B, Fred, the director of the European Space Agency, informs Mag that his wife may only have a few hours left, making it impossible to launch a rescue rocket within a day. This indirectly announces Joe's sacrifice. Surprisingly, Fred starts to cry. Mag angrily rebukes him for not having the right to cry, questioning how Joe's superior could be crying. The issue is that there is a conflict in the relationship between Joe and Mag in Universe B, and Fred, being Joe's close friend, would naturally cry. While working on the space station, Joe suddenly hears Paul's voice and follows it to investigate, only to find Paul's arm floating in the cold atom experiment lab. How could an arm be floating in the air? Joe opens the hatch to go in and check. When he reached the position of the arm, he intended to move it away and grasped it. To his surprise, the arm transformed into Paul as he was alive. Frightened, he quickly let go, and Paul transformed back into an arm. Since Paul was also in the threshold space of the laboratory, he existed in a superposition state of being both dead and alive. When two people in a superposition state are placed together, the outcome becomes even more complex and unpredictable. Joe continued to quickly replace the batteries, and with just an hour and a half left, he finally finished replacing all the batteries, restoring power to Alliance 1, and then went to retrieve the cold atom device. As he prepared for the return journey, Joe recorded an audio message for his husband and daughter, throwing the recorded tablet into the space station. If something were to happen to him, this audio would serve as Joe's farewell message, and then he closed the hatch, preparing for the return. A bolt failure connecting the space station caused the escape pod to be unable to detach. After 40 seconds remained in Universe B, the escape pod still did not appear on the screen. Joe's life was declared as lost. Upon hearing this news, Mag fell into despair, but inside the escape pod, Joe unexpectedly repaired the bolt system and successfully detached from the space station. At that moment, Joe saw a strange scene. He noticed what seemed to be a shadow of a person inside the space station. Since he had already escaped, he paid it no mind, unaware that the shadow in the space station was actually himself. Joe began his return journey, bringing back Paul's body as well, and the space agency suddenly received Joe's return signal. The bridge made contact with the escape pod. As the bridge continued to plummet, Mag excitedly brought his daughter and the rescue personnel to welcome Joe's return. Joe successfully opened his parachute and landed on Earth. But after he opened the hatch, something strange happened. A wild wolf appeared outside. The people on the bridge were stunned. How could there be a wolf here? Unaware that he had arrived at the cosmic wall, a gunshot rang out, killing the wolf just as the welcoming party arrived. After Joe returned to Earth, he finally smiled as his husband and daughter came to him, while Henry anxiously took the cold atom device for further research. Just as Joe's family boarded the helicopter, at the moment Joe's mother touched her, everyone around her disappeared. Where did they go? Did Alice cross over? And what about the bridge here? The people around also vanished. After hearing the sound of the helicopter, Alice suddenly returned. But is she still the same daughter as before? We begin to analyze the reasons while still at the cold atom device. After Joe reached the cosmic wall, due to the interaction between the cold atoms and the observer with the observed, the helicopter met the triggering conditions for the pre-line space, transforming into a superposition state of Universe A and Universe B. Under the influence of the cold atom event, the touch of the bridge caused Alice to also become an observed subject, resulting in abnormal effects. After the touch ends, they transform into individual subjective worlds. In Universe A, the bridge announces a sacrifice, leading Alice to Universe A, a world without a mother. Joe also arrives in Universe A because, in Universe A, Joe is already dead, and there are no rescuers or family members coming. Everything in this space is uncertain. It is not until Henry leaves with the cold atom device that everything returns to normal, back to the cosmic wall. The next scene takes place weeks later at the cosmic wall, where Joe is searching for his biological daughter, asking Alice in front of him where his daughter is. But Alice has no idea what her mother is saying. So Joe puts on his clothes, picks up the cold atom equipment, and searches for his daughter in the snow, looking for the Alice from the bathtub universe. In Joe's memory, the cabin has not been lived in for a long time, and he takes his estranged daughter to the opposite cabin, transitioning to a scene from weeks ago at the cosmic wall, arriving at the bridge of the cosmic wall while receiving physical therapy and various media interviews. Joe and her colleagues go to the astronaut dormitory to mourn the deceased. Meanwhile, Henry makes a significant discovery about cold atoms, finding the cold atom particle superposition phenomenon that was recorded before the space station collision incident. This phenomenon has also occurred in the Earth laboratory. However, Henry did not record it in the Earth laboratory. Later, this phenomenon disappeared. Only Henry encountered and saw signs indicating that he was about to traverse in Universe A. He is not called Henry, he is a retired astronaut, but also did not invent the cold atom experiment, and had previously participated in the Apollo space mission. An accident occurred at the space station, resulting in the sacrifice of 3 astronauts, which became a lifelong psychological shadow for Bud. He reluctantly attended a special event for astronauts, unaware that his life would change again. In the universe, Joe is being interrogated, as the collision with the space station did not capture everyone. The Soviet astronaut's mummified body collides with the space station. Elena, the director of the Russian space agency, questions how the body could have been preserved in space. 30 years later, as Joe continues to explain, Elena leads a change of subject, as if hiding something, even suggesting that Joe must be hallucinating. Joe goes to the medical facility at the space station for rehabilitation training, where the attending doctor gives him a bottle of medication, claiming it's just some vitamins, which Joe doesn't pay much attention to. Upon returning home, Margaret feels a bit out of place, as Joe, who never would have done so in the past, expresses that he misses her. Joe also wants to hold Margaret's hand, but she instinctively picks up a glass of wine instead. In the discussion, Bud and the reporter talk about the Apollo space mission accident. The mysterious deaths of the 3 astronauts touch on Bud's psychological trauma. Bud clearly states that he has no connection to the deaths of his colleagues, but the reporter blames the astronauts' deaths on Bud, which angers him and reveals his murderous intent. In Universe B, Henry sees the cold atom anomaly again and wants to capture it with his phone, but unfortunately, the phone cannot take a picture. It can only be seen with the naked eye, so he has no choice but to draw it. Meanwhile, Joe accidentally falls while practicing walking and asks his daughter to call her father over. At that moment, he sees the cabinet in the hallway again, with his daughter's necklace still on top. Margaret and Alice appeared behind her, and as she looked, the necklace had already disappeared. This indicates that Joe no longer needs the cold atom equipment to meet the conditions for triggering the control space. After attending the meeting, Fred intended to touch Joe's cheek, but Joe subconsciously dodged, leaving Fred confused, wondering, "Aren't we good friends?" Fred angrily left, and Joe was picked up by her husband to go home. Her behavior shocked Margaret, who felt that Joe seemed like a different person. Her eyes filled with affection. Jo went to Paul's grave for a final farewell, but unexpectedly, a strange scene occurred again. She actually saw the deceased Paul standing alive right in front of her. In an instant, he disappeared. When Jo returned home, he found that the position of the cabinet had changed. In his memory, the cabinet was not in this location, and the color of the car had also changed to blue. In Jo's memory, the car was red. Mag said Jo was mistaken, and Jo didn't pay much attention to it. Meanwhile, Henry met with Elena. Both of them were survivors of the Apollo space mission, which made their relationship very close. At the same time, in Universe A, Bud called a reporter to explain that the astronauts of Apollo 18 had suddenly died for some unknown reason, and it was all Henry's fault, having nothing to do with him. When the other party still didn't believe him, he called himself a liar, which made him furious. Henry, who is dancing with Elena in Universe B, pushes a reporter into the sea and sees Elena turn into a corpse. The two deceased appear almost simultaneously, but Elena transforms back into a normal person. What connection does Elena have with the astronaut corpse? In Universe B, weeks later, Jo searches for another biological daughter with his daughter and shares his suspicions with Alice, believing that the daughter in front of him may not be his own. Alice is furious and scolds Jo to bring her mother back. The scene shifts to weeks later in Universe A, where Jo is already dead, and Margaret and Alice are Jo's family. Margaret is taking her daughter to the cabin, which makes Alice feel emotional. A few weeks ago, the family in Universe B celebrated their daughter's birthday, appearing harmonious and blissful on the surface. Margaret told Jo about her poor relationship with him, and the two faced each other with indifference and few words. Even when Jo left, he did not say goodbye to Margaret. However, in Jo's memory, things were not like that. Their relationship had always been good, and he did not understand why it was different now. He just wanted to cherish his current life. By chance, he discovered that he had taught his daughter to play the piano, but when he opened the piano, he was stunned to realize that he could not play at all. Could his hallucinations and memory confusion be a result of post-traumatic stress disorder? Jo did not believe in such feelings. During a diagnosis, he inadvertently bumped into Henry. After seeing Jo, who shares his plight, Henry took him to the laboratory. Henry had once served as an Apollo astronaut, and strange events occurred after his return. He indirectly shared his experiences with Jo, omitting details about parallel universes and cold atoms, concealing the truth of the matter. At this point, Jo discovered the anomalies related to cold atoms, and couldn't help but suspect a connection to the cold atom experiments. Upon returning home, Jo found that his daughter was missing. When he searched for her, he saw the necklace on the cabinet again, which frightened him to the point of trembling. Fortunately, his daughter opened the cabinet door on her own, but he didn't understand why she was hiding from him, which was due to Universe B. The disharmony in their relationship led to the daughter becoming withdrawn. By night, Jo went to the European Space Agency laboratory to test the ingredients of the medication prescribed to him by the space station's medical facility, only to discover that it was actually a treatment for mental illness. He then searched his office for the space station's medical records and found several individuals who were also taking the same medication. These individuals taking the psychiatric drugs all exhibited similar characteristics, experiencing hallucinations and memory confusion, and he also found that Henry was taking this medication. In an instant, the universe once again superimposed, and two staff members entered the room, but they did not see the bridge. Instead, Jo could see them in the subjective world of the Universe A staff members. Jo is dead, so they cannot see him. And while they are sorting through Jo's work supplies, they cannot hear him speaking to them at all. Until Hello brings Jo back to the cosmic wall. He then goes to find Henry to ask about what he needs. He calls out Henry's name, but Henry seems not to hear him. He is talking to Bud on the mirror screen. Henry blames everything on Bud, as their previous Apollo mission allowed them to communicate in the pre-line space, and Jo's presence does not affect this space, indicating that he is not an observer. After coming out, all of this frightens Margaret, and she goes to her husband's workplace to help him teach. However, Jo discovers that Margaret is laughing and chatting with another woman, and a strong sense of jealousy sweeps over the entire classroom. This leads to conflicts between the two, and they return home unhappily. That night, Jo finds that Fred has arrived. As Jo's superior, Fred demands that Jo go to the Russian Space Agency for treatment, but Margaret, who has always suspected Fred, does not agree. Margaret worries that her wife might be taken away by Fred, but fortunately, Jo shows up and drives Fred away. However, Margaret still harbors doubts about her wife. Faced with her husband's distrust, the conflicts escalate, and Jo realizes that this may no longer be his original home. Margaret, furious, exclaims that Jo has changed, and then storms off. Jo, equally upset, feels a surge of anger. The package sent by the Naval Observatory contained recordings of the sounds from the bridge on the space station. Jo listened to it and heard his own cries for help at that time, but the sound was too faint to make out clearly. He then started to listen to the recording of the next Apollo space mission, where he heard a woman speaking, but then the sound cut off. It was as if an accident had occurred at the space station. At this moment, Alice went downstairs to look for her mother and discovered a strange scene. She saw many people in the house and also saw a photo of her mother who had passed away. They were there to attend Jo's funeral, and she also saw the deceased Paul. The mother hurried over to comfort her daughter, and in an instant, those people disappeared again. Margaret angrily scolded her wife for putting their daughter in the closet, and Joe agreed that their daughter shouldn't be put in the closet. The two began to argue, with Margaret furiously blaming her wife for scaring their daughter like this, causing Joe to run away in anger. Margaret insisted that Joe take his medication, and only then did Joe tell her that it was an antipsychotic drug, meant to conceal the truth about what he saw in space. Margaret concluded that her wife must be crazy, so she called Fred to come and take her wife away. Joe finally broke down, crying as he told his mother-in-law that he was very scared in outer space and just wanted to go home. How could the usually warm and generous husband? As Margaret refuses to hang up the phone, Joe and her husband scramble for the phone. In a moment of carelessness, Margaret faints, and Joe rushes to check on her husband, who appears to still be alive. Fred's call has been connected, and he says he will come to pick Joe up. To avoid being caught by Fred and her husband, Joe calls an ambulance for her husband, and plans to take her daughter away from there. Alice asks where her father is, but Joe does not tell her. Seeing her mother so anxious and angry, Alice feels she has no choice but to comply. After driving away with her daughter, she secretly goes to the space agency's laboratory and steals Henry's cold atom device. Joe and his daughter embark on a journey of escape and investigation for the truth. The next day, Henry discovers the cold atom device. It was gone, and he suspected that Joe had stolen it. After returning home, Henry heard Bud's voice in his head and wrote, "Don't turn against me," on the mirror. However, this line appeared in the mirror of Bud's room in Universe A. The leaves, like you, are following the departure. Joe took his daughter for breakfast, and later went to the Naval Observatory, hoping to learn more about the mysterious events in space to unlock the strange occurrences surrounding him. He discovered that many real events at the space station had been covered up, and that tapes recorded those shocking incidents, such as astronauts seeing a space shuttle surrounded by glowing spheres, astronauts hearing barking dogs at the space station, and many astronauts going insane after returning to Earth. These bizarre events can be heard on the tapes, but one must go 10 kilometers off the coast to listen to them, specifically in the pre-line space, such as the outdoor space of the ocean after reaching the designated location. The recording of the 1967 Apollo space mission plays, revealing a female astronaut's mysterious death in the escape pod. This woman might be the astronaut corpse that Joe saw. The only female on that space mission was Elena, the current director of the Russian Space Agency. She returned to Earth alive. Alice asks if anyone has heard Paul's voice, and then the director plays Paul's voice. E4 asks, "You two, learn, love." Paul is clearly dead. Joe believes this is a fabrication, so he leaves with his daughter. He plans to take her to a cabin to hide for a while. Alice, curious, plays Elena's space recording and discovers that the voice coming through is that of Yair from her dreams. This is serious. On the other side, Henry sees Bad in the mirror, claiming to come and wreak havoc on Henry's world, while Joe's side has also transformed into the opening scene. He drives his daughter across the frozen lake to the cabin, and at that moment, he hears his daughter's voice calling, "Mommy." After returning to the cabin and setting down the cold atom device, he played the old recording again, and heard Paul's voice. Upon hearing this, the daughter realizes that the girl is not herself, because she simply does not. Swedish never calls mother in Swedish. Meanwhile, the daughter of the universe is searching for her mother. The scene shifts to the space station 5 weeks ago, where Joe is video calling his daughter in the cold atom laboratory. The cold atom experiment is activated, and a dead astronaut collides with the space station, causing Alice and Joe to lose contact with each other. The rocket propulsion laboratory of Universe B loses contact with the space station, which has now turned into pre-line space. The connection between Universe A and Universe B is at the space station, and after the impact, Joe sees another version of himself. Joe from Universe B has just died at the space station of Universe A. Meanwhile, the bridge of cosmic danger has also crossed into the cosmic wall, and Paul is still alive, searching for the bridge. He discovers the bridge that crashed into the observation window and quickly rushes to rescue it, using wet wipes to seal the crack in the space station. Now, Paul from Cosmic B has crossed over to Cosmic A, where the Earth Space Agency in Cosmic A sends someone to inform Joe's family of an unfortunate message. Joe is dead, and Maggie and Alice are engulfed in grief. Paul, feeling confused, finds that the cold atomic device has mysteriously disappeared. He chooses to stay at the space station, allowing the remaining 3 to return to Earth. He initially planned to send Joe's body back to Earth, but fear made him change his mind. On Earth in Universe A, Alice struggles to accept her mother's death, and secretly hides in a cupboard away from her father. Outside the cupboard, she sees her mother, which is the same scene Joe witnessed in the space station's pre-line space, and it is not an illusion. In Universe B, Joe senses the daughter from Universe A, and in an instant, they return to their respective space stations, where Paul is changing the batteries. At that moment, he noticed that the white cloth on the bridge had floated up, which scared him into quickly covering his head with the cloth again. He listened to see if Joe was still breathing. He heard Joe's voice, his head. Paul was also very scared, so he decided to leave the bridge in the space station laboratory. At the moment of touching the bridge, under the abnormal effects of this intersecting space, both of them were terrified in both worlds. After placing Joe's body in the space station, Paul returned to Earth alone, where he also encountered a bolt malfunction. which quickly returned to normal. As Paul was on his way back, he saw the bridge in the space station. We had brought the bridge from Universe A, taking Joe's body to Universe B. In Universe B, Paul died, while the bridge, which should have died in Universe B, was still alive and well. The Paul from Universe B left Joe's body in the space station. In Universe A, Paul, who was supposed to die there, instead lives on unharmed, which can be understood as a psychedelic occurrence, related to the lives and deaths of Paul and Joe, and the universe they inhabit. After returning to Universe A, Paul visits Joe's grave to say goodbye, but when he looks up, he sees Joe again, and they both scare each other half to death. In an instant, Joe disappears as well. Upon returning home, Paul witnesses a bizarre scene where he sees a photo of himself dead. Later, during a major interrogation, when Paul mentions the cold atom experiment, everyone is confused, and his colleagues don't even know what a cold atom experiment is. There is no mention of cold in the video. The experimental equipment for cold atom experiments in this world was cancelled 12 years ago. Paul, skeptical of this, goes in search of his mentor Henry, only to find that no one has heard of Henry, and no one has invented cold atom experimental equipment. Upon returning home, he finds that his daughter has also changed, seeing her with her mouth open while eating. Paul reluctantly started taking antipsychotic medication, convinced that he must be going crazy. When he attended Joe's funeral, he unexpectedly saw Joe, and another Alice. This scene was also witnessed by Alice from Universe A, causing Paul to be so frightened that he nearly had a heart attack and fainted. Alice not only saw Alice, but also her mother, who was in Universe B. The occurrence at the funeral terrified everyone. To help his daughter and himself forget the pain of losing their loved ones, Maggie took his daughter to a cabin, deciding to live there. After a while, Maggie could no longer suppress his inner pain and cried out, only now believing that his wife had permanently left them. His daughter comforted him, assuring him that they would see her again. Maggie told her that they would never see her again. Meanwhile, Paul found himself at Henry's house, referring to Bud as Commander Henry, but Bud, in front of him, did not recognize Paul at all. Paul shouted that Henry should not be there, and the irritable Bud lost his patience, telling Paul to leave, but Paul continued to cling on, refusing to go. Bud angrily picked up the gun and shot directly. Just as Alice was about to fall asleep, she heard a noise outside and looked out to find it was her mother, so she went out to greet her mom. But the mother had disappeared, and Joe heard his daughter's call, yet he saw nothing. Alice got dressed and went outside to search for her mother, passing right by her. Joe heard footsteps, but still ignored his mom. "I saw you." Alice steps into the cold snow in search of her mother, feeling cold, helpless, and afraid. In Universe B, Joe and his daughter are listening to a recording in a cabin. Is Erickson so badly lacerated? My concern is that when the body gets out of Zero G. Hearing this, Joe turned off the recorder, but the daughter was very clever. She asked her mother if she was different from before. Alice also doubted that she might not be her daughter. She felt that the woman in front of her did not resemble her mother, so the two began to think of ways together. Meanwhile, Maggie, Fred, and the officer took action together to go to the cabin in search of Joe. Henry's purpose for coming was to find the cold atom equipment. On the other side, Joe placed the cold atom equipment in the warehouse, and at that moment, he heard his daughter's call. "Mom." Joe then returned to the cabin to check on her daughter who was sleeping, realizing that the daughter outside might be her biological child, so she hurried to find her. In Universe A, Alice arrived at another cabin and searched everywhere, but did not see her mother, so she hid in the closet. She kept knocking on the closet door, hoping to summon her mother. A miracle happened. Her mother appeared before her, creating a pre-existing space where the relatives from the two worlds finally reunited. Joe rescued her daughter, indicating that the 4 cabins in the 2 universes had all transformed into a pre-existing space. Joe took her back to the cabin where they lived, and by recognizing the scent, Joe confirmed that this must be her daughter. He placed his daughter in the bathtub and warmed her up with hot water, only to find another daughter sleeping. When Alice from Universe B appeared, the 2 universes shifted back from the pre-line space to their respective universes. In Universe A, her mother was missing, and the bathtub in Universe B also turned into an empty one. After Maggie, the mother of Alice in Universe A, was awakened and fell into confusion, she claimed to have seen her mother. However, Maggie did not believe her, and Joe from Universe B was equally distraught. She put on the cold atom device and went with Alice to another cabin to search for the other daughter. Along the way, Alice heard her mother say, "I might not be your mother," and in a fit of anger, she snatched the cold atom device away. She threw it into the snow, and then ran away alone, so Joe had no choice but to find his current daughter first. In Universe A, Alice saw her father fall asleep, and secretly ran out to look for her mother. When Maggie discovered this, her daughter was already missing, so she also ran out to start searching for her daughter. Meanwhile, the cold atomic device that Alice had thrown away was picked up by Alice in Universe A in the bathroom, and she would also experience abnormal effects, all while at the universe barrier. Alice returned to the cabin and turned around to find that her mother was gone. Upon entering the room, the cabin, which had once been her home, had become dilapidated. Now the cabin had transformed into a space that was chaotic, proving that in her subjective world, she was still in Universe B. She discovered that the radio was still in its place, so she took the radio and hid in the wardrobe upstairs. Meanwhile, in Universe A, Alice also arrived at the cabin, and contrary to her expectations, the situation was alive. She too entered the wardrobe and found a radio inside. The two Alices from different worlds discovered that by recording and playing back on the radio, they could hear each other's voices. At that moment, Joe and Margaret, though in different worlds, could both listen. Margaret had never encountered the voice of her daughter. She became an observer of the cold atom. Both Margaret and Joe opened the wardrobe at the same time, but unfortunately, they did not see their daughter. Only a radio emitting the voices of two daughters. We're the same Earth. Don't know. Margaret from Universe A immediately goes out to report to the police, telling the officer that her daughter is missing and begins searching for her. Joe from Universe B quickly runs to another cabin, believing his daughter should be there. Unbeknownst to him, a gust of wind knocks over an oil lamp, igniting a fire in the cabin of Universe B. The two Alices discover that they can see each other through the mirror and learn that the mother in Universe A has died. Universe B states that the bridge in Swedish is the same as the bridge in Universe A. The two Alices realize that their mothers must have swapped places. At that moment, Joe notices that the cabin behind him is on fire, and worried about his daughter, he returns to search for her. Henry, Margaret, and others from Universe B have already arrived at the cabin. A capture operation is launched against Joe. In Universe B, Joe runs towards Schrodinger's cabin, without any observers. Once he enters, it transforms into other cabins. Joe is the subject of observation, so he can see the superposition of the two universes. He sees the cabin from the universe wall that caught fire in a mural, but Joe is in the cabin of Universe A, where two cats appear, one dead, and one alive. He rushes upstairs to search for his daughter, but unfortunately, when he opens the cabinet, he only sees the daughter from the universe wall, as they have returned to their respective universes. Henry finds his cold atom device in the snow, and his fate will change once again. Joe hears the voice of his biological daughter on the radio, but he can only speak to her through the daughter from Universe B. Joe finally believes that all of this is not an illusion. They can all see another Alice through the mirror. At this moment, thick smoke has spread upstairs. Outside, Henry sees this scene and quickly puts down the cold atom to check it out. The smoke makes Alice cough continuously, and when she faints, the flames rush in instantly. She quickly picks up her daughter and runs outside. At the same time, Henry also arrives at the scene, and images of Bud flash through her mind in an instant. Henry and Bud undergo a consciousness swap, with Henry confused about why he has become Bud, holding a gun and standing over Paul, who has been shot on the ground. Bud is also puzzled about how he has turned into Henry. Joe quickly hands his daughter over to Henry and rushes into the room to save his own daughter. After placing the unfamiliar girl on the ground, Henry also collapses in the snow. Joe searches for his daughter amidst the flames but cannot find her. When he emerges, he discovers that another daughter has stopped breathing. Joe hurriedly performs CPR, at which point he sees Alice from Universe A in the snow. Margaret from Universe A is also searching for her daughter, calling out her name. Joe hears his husband's voice. In an effort to bring their daughter back to her father, Margaret seems to see her wife, and approaches to confirm whether it is indeed her daughter and wife. However, when the team from Universe B arrives, Joe disappears from Margaret and Alice's sight. Alice asks her father if he saw her wife, but Margaret couldn't see clearly, and doesn't know if it was her wife. After reviving their daughter, the bridge from Universe B quickly searches for another daughter, but she is already gone, and then two strong men arrive. The officer takes Joe away, and Alice from Universe B falls into a coma, dreaming of a corpse in a spacesuit that she names Xiaoya. Meanwhile, the bridge at the space station has already perished. As if watching everything unfold within the walls of the universe, Joe is locked up in a mental hospital, where he sees the astronaut's corpse again, visible only to the bridge. Since Bud has turned into Henry, we continue to call him Bud. Upon waking, he discovers the cold atom device, and quickly finds a recorder to play the Apollo accident recording next to the cold atom. Realizing that the astronauts in this world are all alive, and that he has become a hero, he then picks up an axe, and smashes the cold atom device, allowing Henry to bear his infamy, forever remaining in that world. After the cold atom is destroyed, it seems that the pre-existing space also disappears. Alice from Universe B learns that her mother has already died in space. The other Alice's situation was reported to her father, but Margaret also did not believe it, thinking that her daughter must have been brainwashed by her husband. Meanwhile, Eleanor serves as the head of the psychiatric hospital, where they detect that Joe is pregnant. Strangely, the fetus in Joe's womb exhibits a superposition state, raising the question of whether the baby of Joe from Universe A and Margaret from Universe B has the ability to traverse between the two worlds. In Universe A, Henry is arrested for multiple assaults. He explains that he did not commit these murders, and that he is not Bud, who requested the DNA test. However, the test results show that he shares DNA with Bud, and he will have to pay for the crimes committed by Bud in Universe B. The carefree life has brought Henry all his achievements and fame. After waking up, Joe wants to leave the psychiatric hospital, but Elena tells him that his condition is too severe. If he doesn't receive treatment, he will eventually go completely insane. She informs Joe about her pregnancy, but expresses that she doesn't want the fetus, as having a child would make it impossible to return to her loved ones. Joe still refuses to listen to her advice. When Elena turns to leave, Joe grabs her, and she transforms into the astronaut's corpse, leading Joe to a moment of realization. It turns out that Elena is Apollo, the one who swaps places with another Elena in a different world. After Elena's death, her body collides with the space station, and Elena travels from Universe A to Universe B, sharing the same fate as Joe. Elena can no longer go back, so she decides to live well under a new identity. This is the reason why Elena conceals the truth. Even though Joe learns the truth, she cannot escape the mental hospital because no one believes the nonsense she speaks. Bud meets with Elena, and as a result, Elena learns that Bud has returned from his journey. She wants him to go to the mental hospital for treatment, but little does she know that Bud has already seen through everything and refuses treatment. You can keep on denying it and covering it up, just like you always have. Alice from Universe B and Alice from Universe A can still communicate using a tape recorder, as they know the original truth. There is no turning back. Accepting what has happened is the best choice. Alice from Universe B, with the guidance of her friends, decides to cherish her mother, who is present. Meanwhile, Alice from Universe A has also come to terms with things and will no longer search for her mother, as she has entrusted the responsibility of caring for her mother to another Alice, believing that her mother will live well. Elena also confesses everything to Joe, encouraging her to live well in this world. What has happened cannot be changed, and in the future, she may still become a mother to 2 children. Since the current situation cannot be altered, the only option is to change oneself. Living well is the best choice. Maggie comes to pick up Joe, taking her away from Joe and Alice. Alice also encourages her mother to accept the reality, and she makes a promise to Joe that she will become the Alice in her heart. Joe finally makes a decision. She will live well as a substitute for the Joe in this world. But will the story really develop happily like this? Paul, who has accepted treatment, wakes up and looks at his hands, which are surprisingly unharmed. This suggests that the consciousness of the deceased Paul has returned to his body. Meanwhile, Joe's body is still floating in the space capsule at the space station. Has she really died? Or perhaps she hasn't died? What if the Joe from the 2 universes have swapped places?